This is On the Overrun, a podcast about cars and the people around them. Join us for a new episode. Welcome back to On the Overrun. If this is the first time you've watched this podcast, this is literally about cars and the people around them. Not too fussy, not too finicky. I chat with people who have insane car stories, experiences with cars, been in and around cars, and I just hear what they have to say. I learn as much as you guys do, and I always find it fascinating hearing and seeing what kind of people, especially in and around South Africa, we have, that when it comes to cars, has had the most insane experiences. I'm a car guy myself, just like you all are watching probably are as well. So I hope you're going to enjoy this one. As you would have noticed by now, I am not with some special guest inside of this room. I'm in the comfort of my own home. But I am actually linking into someone who sits a few thousand kilometers from me, straight in the heart of the UK, where it is much colder than it is here in South Africa at the moment. I'm sweating from the heat, but I mean, let's just say my guest probably doesn't remember what sweat feels like when it comes from heat. But anyway, Andrew, good to have you on the podcast. We haven't spoken before, haven't really met, but got into contact over Instagram recently. And I just find it fascinating what you do. This guy's a racing driver. He drives Porsches, which is someone who's sort of my age. It's not typical, but has also won many trophies, gotten many victories, and has made quite a name for himself, not just here in South Africa, but also abroad. And that's why he is sitting in Britain right now, is for those Porsches as well. So, Andrew, just to kick us off, how on earth do you get to drive GT3 race cars at the age of like 22, 23? Like, do you think did you like win the lotto or something, or like what? How is that possible?
It came, geez, it started off when I was 13 years old. So I was grade 7, I think just about to go into grade 8. And I had a lot of energy, always wanting to do stuff, always playing sports, rugby, hockey, tennis, polo, anything I could think of. And then and all of a sudden I got an injury in my knee. So I wasn't able to play any sports, and after school I'd literally go home and it would all be quite depressing. And my dad actually used to race when he was younger. So my mom said, "Why don't you take him down to the local indoor karting track?" So I had been to this track before because I live in Cape Town, so it would be Kalani. But I used to cry and cry, and I didn't like the noise. I never understood it. I wasn't a big fan at all, honestly. But my dad decided to take me to Kalani. I got put in a little Max Torino, which is a 60cc little go-kart, but still super quick, over 100 k's an hour when you're so young.
Yeah, that's good.
And basically, as soon as I saw the cart, I fell in love. I drove it. I was literally obsessed. It was like a drug. My dad actually bought the cart then and there.
Yeah.
I met my driver coach, Claudio Piazzamuso, who's a world champion in karting and a huge name in South Africa. And basically from there, it started off as a hobby and started becoming more and more serious, but studies was always first, which actually struggled with quite a lot with doing school. But my dream was to race cars.
I can
And
imagine
so
you're constantly distracted.
it was super hard to keep a balance, especially studying for a test and you knew you had a race coming up, and all you could
Mm.
think about was the racing. I mean, I remember in the early days after a race weekend, I used to come home and my cart used to smell like fuel, two-stroke fuel. And I just slept in it. after every race, I used to sleep in it. And I would take a rag and I would dip it in the fuel and I used to just smell it, as
Oh
crazy
my
as it is.
word.
And I,
Yeah, that
yeah.
is a slight addiction, but let's not go into that problem.
But I think through all the years, like anything, I started off, and I don't think I was a superstar of any note, but just through years and years of practice, and I mean, the addiction and all I could really think about through that, it's kind of led to this amazing opportunity with me sitting in England. Um, my first proper year of being able to only do racing and not do studies. So
Sure.
it's
That's
super
amazing.
exciting.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. So, what I'm hearing is obviously it started off with your dad. He had some prior experience with racing in the past, in his past. But was cars anywhere in the scene before that? Like, because you mentioned that you didn't actually really like going to the track. It was just a bunch of loud noises and stuff that make you scared. But was cars anywhere in the picture? Did you go through magazines? Is that an interest of yours, or did it really just start in that moment?
I think I've always had an obsession for speed, but things that I couldn't understand, especially when I was younger, I wasn't too attracted to. So because motorsport, for the average person, no one can understand it. You can't understand the sensation, you can't understand the speed, the G-forces, the actual feeling
Mm.
that you get. It's so different to a road car. But I used to start, I mean, from when I was a child, I used to ride my bike as quick as possible, downhill mountain biking. I also used to do RC cars, and I think that was probably when
Yes.
the racing side of my brain started clicking. So me and my dad, on I think maybe a Wednesday night, used to go to like a parking lot and they used to put ropes down to make the circuit and everyone used to race. And I remember I had my little mini RC car, a literal mini, which I loved. And I used to race. I won a few races and then a car reversed when someone was leaving reversed over my mini, and that was kind of the end of my
No,
RC days. I
that's
know
horrible.
I was so upset. But then I think once I got into karting, everything kind of just started flowing together from karting to main circuit, and then obviously through main circuit, Porsche.
Yes. Question I need to ask is how old are you now? Are you 22, 23?
22, turning
Okay.
23.
So you got your license a few years ago, and obviously you would have driven a bunch of fast cars before you like were able to legally drive on the road. But did you pass your driver's test first time?
So this is actually a funny story. Um, but so I started main circuit racing in a Formula Ford, which is literally a spider looking car, open wheels, 1600, but with a H pattern gearbox. So you had
Yes.
to change gears, and that was at 16 years old. So I had to learn how to drive a car at 16, basically, and start racing it. And then came when I turned 18, and I said, okay, I will get my learners and then I'll get my drivers. So I studied for the learners, and I wasn't, maybe I was a bit cocky because I was like, oh, please, man, I can drive.
Obviously. Yes.
Obviously, I can drive. What are they wanting? So I studied the book that my parents gave me, which was just a single book, and I never questioned it. And I went in, wrote the exam, and then they said, "Can you just everyone wait outside? And if we call you in, you can come collect it." They didn't call my name, and I'm standing there with a father and a son. I'm going, "Why do you think we got a really high mark? Like, do you think that's what it is?" They're like, "I'm not really sure." They called us in and we had failed. The three of
Oh
us out of the
no.
whole class, we had failed the learners, so the written part of it.
Yes, yes, yes.
I get back to the car and my mom's waiting for me. Oh, perfect. So you have your learners. I said, Mom, I failed. She said, not a chance. Not a chance. I said, unfortunately, I have failed. So I had to redo that, but we found out someone had taken the second part because there was two parts,
Yes.
and someone had taken one of the books from the store or whatnot. So I only had one. So learners wasn't too
No, that's
great.
horrible. That's very funny though.
Yeah. So it knocked my confidence quite a bit. But then I was convinced because my dad got his driving license the day he turned 18. So I made it kind of my mission to, as I turned 18, to do my driving test. So that was the whole plan. But the driving part of it, my mom told me, do not, whatever you do, tell them you race cars. Whatever you do, because they will just look at you and they won't like you, kind of thing.
Yeah, obviously.
I get this driving teacher, and we go to this. He says, "Have you driven a car before?" I said, "No. No, I don't even know what I'm doing." So he puts me in the driver's seat and we're in this like a gravel road. And he says, all we're going to do is practice clutch control. Perfect. Which one's the clutch? Looks at, oh, yeah. So he says, the one on the left, the one in the middle is the brake, one on the right's the throttle. Perfect. Anyway, I think I pulled off and he was like, oh, okay, you have driven a car before. I said, I didn't want to tell you, but I do race cars. So I have driven a clutch car. Perfect. So you can just start driving around the block. And basically, at the end of it, every single time I got into the car, I was heel and towing. Basically, didn't learn that much, but it was. And then I passed the drivers. So failed learners, passed drivers.
Okay.
At least, I think it's better than me failing my drivers. In all
Yes.
honesty,
I think I passed my drivers on the second time, but I remember for me it was a massive thing because I obviously love cars and I know it's the gateway into this thing
yeah.
I love, and I don't just get to look at it, I get to drive it as well. So when I failed my first time, I was distraught. I thought the world was crumbling in around me. But so anyway, I guess you just put a lot of pressure on yourself because you're a car guy. So you just don't expect yourself to fail at all. But good
But
to
I
hear
think
that.
there's such a difference with driving a road car if you're a car guy and then passing a driver's test. It's two very different things. I mean, with
No,
all the
fair.
stopping, looking, handbrake, and then if you don't look all the way here, so you're never ever looking straight. You're doing
Yeah.
the driving test, and the whole time you're looking here. If someone stops in front, dead.
Yes.
But you have to do
That
it
it
to
is a test ultimately. It is a test.
it
It's
is.
definitely it's irritating because most of it you don't use when you actually drive.
Exactly.
But when it comes to you started basically driving road cars at 16 or race cars, but like you would a normal car with clutch control and everything. But how does the progression work from the type of cars you go, and at what point do you need like a special license or some certification to go on to the next type of car or level? How does that progression typically look like?
So normally people start in karts because you can start so young. So you can start in go-karting at around 5 years old already. So that's when you hear any racing driver, they'll say they started at 6. Like me starting at 13 was old. That's
Yes.
old for a racing driver. So normally you start with go-karting. In South Africa, lots of people will start at go-karting. Then I think the year they turn 16, I could be wrong, they can go to main circuit, which is cars. And there are lots of different options. You don't need a license per se. If you've done karting already, you just need an MSA license. There's no real test that you have to do to prove you're a racing driver if you have a bit of experience. Um, And then you can either choose going single seaters, which is kind of the road to Formula One. So you start in South Africa. Our pinnacle of single seaters is Formula 1600, which is like the overseas Formula 4. The only difference is Formula 4 may have a bit bigger tires and they have a
Mm-hmm.
paddle shift. We have sequential, which
Yes.
I enjoy more. But in terms of lap times, I don't think there's much difference. But then there's nothing you can do afterwards. So that was my route. I went karting, single seaters. I won the South African National Formula 1600 championship in 2021. And then after that, you have to decide what you're going to do if you want to stay in South Africa or if you want to go overseas to try get to Formula One. The biggest problem, and lots of people don't understand with racing, is it's a huge financial strain.
I can imagine.
And just to get Formula One is you have to be spending oh, eye-watering amounts. Any figure you think it takes
Yes.
to get to Formula One is a lot more. So after the 1600s, I went to GTC, which is kind of the pinnacle of any racing, tin top racing in South Africa nationally, which is it's a space frame. So all the chassis are the same, but the likes of Volkswagen is involved, Toyota Gazoo Racing,
Mm.
um, and so there was BMW, but that wasn't a manufacturer team, but it's supposed to resemble the road cars, but
Mm.
super hard cars to drive because no ABS, no traction control, and when I was racing, it was a complete lock diff. So whenever you would get on the power, it would basically just understeer off the track. And then after that, those 2 years, I did it for 2 years, and it was a hard few years with lots of luck not being on our side. And then
Yes.
after that, now I'm here, and it's kind of all through meeting people. You have to be in the right place, right time. The people you meet make an impression, obviously perform. But it's not the first time I've been to England. I have done Formula Ford racing, so that was kind of my meeting England and racing in England. And I just remember it was in Formula Ford, it being so cold. And because you're not in a closed car, your feet and your hands and your face, you come out the car and you are just numb, numb,
Mm.
numb. And it's raining. And oh no, it was a shock to the system.
I can
Really
imagine.
was.
So, what are you currently doing in England? What race are you going, or what racing series are you taking part in, and what's the plan going forward?
So this year I am doing Porsche Carrera Cup Great Britain. So all the tracks in England I'll be doing, um, as well as some Formula Ford races. This was through my sponsor and people who I've met in South Africa have made these connections and helped me along the way. So those are the two series that I want to. The main one we'll be focusing on is the Porsche series.
Yes.
It's super, super competitive, so you really need to be on top of everything. And basically, everything has to be perfect because we're talking about the top 10 will be split by 2/10, which is nothing. That's, I mean, quicker than that. And when you blink.
Yes.
But then the Formula Fords to keep me busy and just keep my reactions fast. But hopefully to win the Porsche Cup, I think is the main goal. I'm under no illusion that becoming a pro racing driver is really hard,
Yes.
and it's such a small percentage. So I'm not disillusioned to the fact that's why my parents always said studies comes first, but now they've given me this amazing opportunity to do what I've always dreamt of and make the most of it.
Yeah.
So I think the Porsche Cup, because it's linked to Porsche, it's an amazing route to, if you do well and you do get noticed from Porsche, then it's a really nice inroad to become a Porsche factory driver.
Yes.
Um, and that would be through GT3 racing, which is more an endurance type of racing where you have teammates and you'll be racing for the manufacturer. So that would be kind of my fairy tale story, to be racing for Porsche. Me and my father have always been Porsche nutheads. I've always had a soft spot, even with driver training. Hopping in Porsches is just my favorite
Mm.
thing. But if that doesn't work out, there are lots of really wealthy people in motorsport that race, but they obviously have jobs and they don't have the time to perfect the car's setup and
Yeah.
all that goes into that. And they need someone who can coach them and race with them, who they pay. So that kind of would be second option.
Okay.
Both are very hard, and it's out of all the racing drivers, there's very few that actually get paid. But I
Yeah.
basically just have to take it 1 year at a time and hope for the best, meet the right people, be in the right place, right time, and then see what happens.
What I'm hearing is that there's no, I guess there would be a template or a ordinary path for racing that you can sort of follow and connect the dots and so on, but there's really no formula. There's really no single way of it going. If I choose this path, it'll definitely go this way. Because what I'm hearing is you keep on saying, I met this person and then this door opened, or I came into this community of people and then this opportunity came to be. That's just like what it sounds like. There's really no typical way.
There's, I mean, like everyone says, there's so many ways to skin a cat, and everyone has their own idea of what's best to get you to be the best in motorsport. But I mean, you can start anywhere. People, one of my teammates this year, he started in oval racing on dirt,
Yeah.
and he didn't touch karting. Um, and then from karting, I think he went straight to GT3 racing. So everyone has a different starting point. Um, but I think it's more like I keep saying, who you meet, what doors open, who you can make an impression. But the thing is, when you have to perform and perform well, you have to be the best of the best to get the opportunities and the doors to open. And I think that's the hard bit, to kind of, you get given a one opportunity, one test day, let's say. So the team will test you, and if the test day goes well and you're quick enough, but you're competing against all these other people fighting for the same team, same series, and if you're not the best, or you're not competitive and they can't see, because teams will want to win. So if you don't utilize that, then you don't really stand a chance.
Yeah.
But it's
But it sounds to me that when it comes to being the best, you progressed quite quickly through the ranks. Since you only started at 15, uh, winning so many different championships, progressing to where you are now. Am I right to say that you progressed quite quickly, actually?
I think, like I said, I have been very lucky to have the people that I've had along the way. So my starting points in each series, I wasn't really starting from scratch where I was clueless. I was always helped by a lot of people. And I mean, South Africa has an amazing community. Everyone who races it's such a small community, but it feels like family. And
Yes.
everyone's so willing to help young people. So I think the mentors that I've had along the way have had a massive impact. But it has, I mean, if I think about it, it feels like just yesterday I was getting into a car for the first time when I was, what was it, 15, 16. And now I keep having to pinch myself because this is feels like yesterday that I've just started, but now I'm here, which is
Yes,
it's quite weird and strange.
that's amazing. And when it comes to, you're obviously in England now, busy with the Carrera Cup or going to start it soon. Um, is it just you on your own, or do you actually have some mates that you've progressed with through the ranks over the years that are sort of in the same field, or do you feel you've started splitting from some of the people you started off with? Because I can imagine it can become quite lonely at a point if you're aiming towards a certain direction, and maybe that isn't other people's paths, but you're still passionate about that. So yeah, is yeah, comment on that.
I think the hard part for me was if you're wanting to be the best in something, you do have to sacrifice a lot. And I'm talking here and I'm super happy to be in England, but I am alone. I haven't moved here with anyone, so everything I'm doing is kind of on my own. So I think within a week I've already probably done 15, maybe 20 hours of driving just on
Yeah.
the road to tracks back home, like small things. Where do you shop? You don't really know. I don't know
Yes.
any friends here. So I had to find a gym. There is another South African, Jade Kruger, that lives about an hour away that also went through the Porsche Cup route that's been helping me just what do I do when I'm here? I
Yes.
mean, there's a forest right here that I can go run to, but without him, I wouldn't have known where do I shop. The things here
Mm.
are quite different as well. So that part of it is hard when you're not racing. There's no South African that's racing Porsche Cup Great Britain. Everyone, there are a few that's doing single seaters overseas, a few that's doing GT3, but I think whenever we bump into one another or we hear the accent, I've already bumped into a few South Africans who I haven't known, but just because they heard that the accent and wanted to know what was my story, what am I doing here, you kind of have a really strong relationship already, and they really do take care of you. I've
Mm.
always said South Africa is kind of like a big family. We have our problems in South Africa, as we all know, but
Yes.
especially when you go overseas, it's one of the most supportive countries, and you really do feel included in South Africa. Like we're all facing ESCOM together, kind of thing. Like we're all in it together, everyone, and no one likes it, kind of thing. But you feel like it's all of our struggles.
Yes.
And I mean, that's why I incorporated so much South Africa, so much of the South African color scheme into the car, just so there are South Africans that can watch on TV, or if
Mm.
there's South Africans here or have South African heritage, they really do, they can bond with the car because they can relate to it, which I think
Yes.
is very, very important. I did want to make it known that South Africa, even though it's quite small and the racing is small, we really do have a do or die attitude. And whatever we do in South Africa, whatever sports we play, we are great. And I
Mm.
feel like it is a lot because of our upbringing in South Africa and just the mindset we have in South Africa, especially sportsmen. So I think it was very important to integrate that South African logo. And just so people can feel like they know that person because it's South Africa is small, so they probably do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
To some extent, you can relate. That's
exactly.
but obviously, I know being in Great Britain, there is quite a few of us over there, for work or whatever it may be. So I can imagine every now and then you may hear an accent that sounds familiar. But
And it
but
is
going,
fantastic.
I can imagine it's like, oh my word, that word
Oh
doesn't
my
come
God.
that word isn't ever said in Britain. You must be a South African. So that's
Even just
quite
saying
cool.
how's it. People don't really know how's it or where or no, I'm coming now. Things like that.
Yes. No
You
one
don't know
says that.
what. No. So when I heard your voice, I was like, oh, hallelujah. Thank
No, I'm glad I could spark some remembrance back. But going to the car, you mentioned now that you actually had some input in the color scheme of the car. Do Obviously, I guess each racing series is different, but to what extent do you have input in the the look, the setup, the feel, that car in general? Obviously, you're not the one physically working on it necessarily, but to what extent do you have input into that car?
So I've been quite lucky. Normally, with the color scheme, it goes, your team normally has a color scheme for each car to make it look like they're part of the same team. Or if you have a major sponsor, they will have normally the biggest input on
Yes.
how the car should look and revolve around them. Luckily, I was given quite a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do. And it took, I mean, geez, it was a back and forth process of trying to incorporate a South African flag, but something that hasn't been done before and
Mm.
really grab people's attention, but also we also have South African tourism on board, which is super exciting. And just, I think to bring on the race weekends in England, it's like a cult here. There are so many people that come to the racing. And I mean, just for that car you can so clearly see it is South African. So for people in England, to see a South African car and maybe, I don't know, think, why don't we travel to South Africa or just
Yes.
making it
Yes.
more South Africa on the map of motorsport? I mean, we have such amazing drivers, and I believe it really is a beautiful country. You can't find somewhere so beautiful, really. Wherever I go in the world, South Africa will always be home. Like I said, we have our major issues, but there really is nothing like South Africa. Everyone's so friendly. Sorry, but I'm getting off track
You're
topic.
obviously
I may
passionate
start crying
about
if
the
I talk
country,
about
which
South
is a
Africa.
good thing to hear. Um,
But yeah, so I was given lots of freedom, and they actually finishing delivery today, which I wasn't able to sleep last night because I was just so excited to see it in the flesh. And then the first test would be next week when we have a Porsche Media Day. So then I'll be able to see it properly on track.
nice. That's very
So
exciting.
I'm excited about that.
Going back to, well, probably your time in South Africa, but just your racing experience thus far. I want you to think back to some of the most memorable races you've had. Maybe there's one that stands out. Maybe there's two or three that really was just so memorable for you, or such a landmark race, or a race that just opened doors to the next, or whatever it may be. Are there a race two or three that you can think about that were like, yes, those were some of the best races of my life probably thus far? Obviously, the career hasn't been so long, but is there one or two you can think about?
There really have been so many amazing memories. Um, but I think the things that stand out to me the most are not maybe what you say my best races, where I've come from the back of the grid or whatnot, but the one that really stands out for me was when I was racing in the single seater national championship, super competitive series. And it was, I think there were 2 rounds to go. So we are now second last round. And I knew if I won the day, so if I get pole position, if I win race one, if I win race two, I'll win the championship. And that would be then my first national main circuit championship that I'd won. which for me was really hard because of the studying and I wasn't able to practice as much
Mm.
as the other people were. So for me, it was a really big thing. And we managed to get pole position. We won race one. And race two, I was so nervous. Like I normally get quite nervous and understandably, but it just felt like the whole world was on my shoulders and I didn't
Yes.
believe that I could win. Um, and I remember starting race two, it's a standing start and the lights go on and they will wait, which feels like the whole world has just stopped. And then they go off and you have to get a perfect start. Anyway, we won race two, but that I think crossing the line was the most intense feeling that I've ever felt. Kind of, I can actually do this, even though I've
Yes.
started later than most. I haven't completed a full championship up until that point because of studying. So to cross the checkered flag and win was quite a big feeling for me. It wasn't the most exciting race. I think it was a flag to flag victory. So it wasn't
Yeah.
very tough, but I mean, it was an exceptional year. So overall, that year was one of my favorite years. I think we had 5 out of 6 pole positions, 13 out of 14 race wins, a few lap records.
Pretty good, yeah.
It was a good year. So I think that as a race and as a year, that was probably one of my favorite years that I've done in motorsport. I think this will now maybe overtake that year.
Probably.
Um, but other than that, in South Africa, my hardest race hasn't actually been in South Africa, but rather in England,
Okay.
where It is, it was for Formula Ford last year. It's called the Walter Hayes Trophy, which is about just under 200 competitors come from all around the world to
Yeah, it's a
race
lot.
this race. And the best of the best Formula Ford drivers from any age. And you get put into heats, and then through that heat, it basically is elimination process. So you will have to make the quarterfinals, semifinals, and then the finals. So we it was a really hard weekend because it was raining and because South Africa, we don't have rain. We don't race in the rain. So for
Yeah.
us and the cold conditions, it affects the tires quite a lot. So you can never get temperature into the tires. Normally in South Africa, you have the opposite effect where the tires will overheat and basically become glue and then will
Mm.
just start sliding over the circuit. In England, you just can't get temperature in the tires. So you're always just sliding. Um, so it was raining basically the whole week, and our pace was looking quite good. And we were put in our group, which is about, I don't know how many it was split into, I can't remember, maybe 35 people. We qualified fourth. Wasn't the
Yeah.
greatest qualifying because it was raining so much. And obviously, the people in England just had such an advantage. For me, it was just weird to be racing in the rain.
Mm.
But the previous year, I'd done the same series and I made it to the semi-final and I was lying third or something in the semi-final and I got taken out and I dropped back I couldn't finish the race, so I couldn't make the final.
Yeah.
And I made it my mission that I would come back last year and try make it to the final and see what I can do.
Yes.
So anyway, the lights got out for the first race, which is the quarterfinals, and the front runners crash. And for me, I try avoid it and I go into the kitty litter. This is in Silverstone, so the
Mm.
gravel trap. And I remember avoiding it and going, oh my word, I'm coming out first. I think I may win this. Next thing I know, I'm in the kitty litter, which is the gravel, and it
Yes.
just stops you, and I couldn't move. I was spinning the tires, nothing was happening. I dropped back last on the grid, and I just remember in that moment going, "Oh my word, it's all over again." And it was something out of my control. And we had
Yeah.
such good pace with being quickest in most sessions. Anyway, the marshals came and pushed me back on the circuit, but I was already a lap down
Yes.
and I finished last. And I thought it was all over. Anyway, there was something that's called the last chance race, which is all the people that finished from 25th to 35th in the races all get put together. And the top 10 of that, I think it was top 10, if you came in the top 10, you will then go into the progression race, which is another kind of last chance race,
Yes.
but you will start either 25th to 35th. So if you win the last chance race, in the progression race, you'll start 25th.
Okay.
So I started 35th in this last chance race. We managed to win that. So then we started 25th in the progression race,
Yeah.
and we managed to win that again out of whatever it was, the 35 people. And then we made it to the semi-finals, which again I had to start last,
It's a lot of
basically.
races. It like to the final. It sounds like a lot of races.
It's a lot because they were just under 200 people. And I
Okay.
mean, everyone who made it to the finals is a really good driver. So we started the semi-finals basically last, and obviously each race it gets harder and harder because the competition gets
Mm.
better and better and better. And we managed to come from last to finish fifth, which
Yeah.
was good enough to put us in a reasonable placing in the finals, where we started, I think, 10th or ninth in the finals. But obviously, it gets harder and harder and
Yes.
harder.
Yes.
Now you have to come back again, and your tires are older than the competitors. So obviously, you'll be a bit slower. But started the finals, and I thought, let my inner South African come out, basically. We've come so far. Whatever happens, I'll be proud of myself. But we
Mm.
managed to come third in the final, always battling for first. I mean, we all crossed the line within point two or point one of each other from first to fifth or something
That's
like that.
crazy.
So that was the first South African that has ever stood on the podium in that race, and we've been trying for quite a few years as South Africans. So that was, I think, a proud moment, and it was something like we calculated it was just under 80 overtakes in the four races. Every single race we did, it was fastest lap. So we walked out of it quite proud, but
Yeah.
then I said this year will be the year that we win it.
And when in this year is that happening?
It's so that's at the end, so November. So the Porsche
Okay.
racing will be over, the series will be over, and then we have one last race, and then I come home to South Africa, enjoy all the sun, soak it all up, and then
Yes.
hopefully come back next year to the cold.
Right back into winter. Don't think
Oh,
about
I
that
know,
now. Don't think
I
about that
know.
now.
You're gonna
You
make
get
me
to drive
cry.
in the Porsche Carrera Cup. That's special enough. So
It is. It
I'm sure
really
there's
is.
enough heat in that car to remind you of I
No,
don't know
true. Yeah,
some
it gets
sunny
hot.
beach.
Yo,
But
it gets hot.
I actually want to chat about the car. Um, I want to get into the detail of what that car is, what it's like, the specs, the engine, what it consists of, and also just a comment on is it a big progression from what you've driven in the past? Is it similar to some car you've driven in the past, or yeah, how different is it? But yeah, I'd like to get stuck in the details of the car you're driving at the moment.
So it's a four-cylinder, 4-liter, six-cylinder engine. So it's pushing out just over 500 horsepower. I'm not too sure about the weight, but they are quite light because obviously
Yes.
everything basically is carbon fiber, and it's stripped out. So it feels fast. I mean, I've been racing a lot of cars, and that sensation for to get into a car and go, that is super quick, means that it is very fast.
Yes.
Um, I think driving it because of the things that I've already raced in South Africa. I'd already raced a Audi R8 GT3, Lamborghini Gallardo GT3, some
Mm.
LMP3 cars, which are prototype Lamar cars.
Oh wow.
It's all helped me quite a lot to be very adaptive. So I didn't struggle that much with getting in the car and getting up to pace. I think the hardest part was, again, the conditions are so different to South Africa. And because it doesn't have traction control and no ABS, and because the engine sits on the rear axle,
Yes.
I mean, it should not mechanically work. It shouldn't. On the drawing board, it just shouldn't work. And well, when you drive it correctly, it does. But the technique to learn how to drive a rear engine car,
Mm.
because there's no weight on the front, is super difficult. And that's basically what will make you, we're all testing at the moment, and whoever figures out how to maximize driving with the engine in the rear will win the championship,
Mm.
basically. So that's kind of what we're all fighting on. And I think the hardest thing is you have to be so late on the brakes to carry as much speed into the corner, but the front of the car is so light. So if you think about the weight distribution when you're going down the straight, it's kind of pointing up the
Yes.
nose. As
Yes.
soon as you brake, it will start pointing down. And once you let go of the brake, it will start coming up again. And in that position, when it starts coming up again, it will have quite a lot of understeer. So you
Mm.
really need to be on the brake for so long. If you watch a Carrera Cup race, it almost looks like they're around the corner and they're still on the brakes. Um, but because of that weight, it is just so easy to lock up a
Mm.
tire. And then when you're getting on the power, you have to trail brake all the way into the corner, rotate the car, and then basically full throttle all the way. As soon as you touch a throttle, it's full throttle because you have so much weight on the rear. It just squats and then goes.
Yes.
So it's been a really big learning curve trying to get all of that correct. And I mean, we're talking millimeters difference
Mm.
on the track and positioning. And I'm fortunate enough to have Nick Tandy, who's a Porsche factory driver who owns the team, helping me. So he
That's
gets in the car
amazing.
sometimes. Yeah. So, and I mean, for me, I had him on my poster in my bedroom when I was a child. And now to be
And
racing
now
in
he's
his team
coaching. That's amazing.
and to be talking to him on WhatsApp, it's all quite weird. I mean, I feel like I'm in really good hands, and he's super experienced, obviously, and one of the best drivers out there.
Yes.
So to be getting helped along the way is amazing. I wish, and I say this to everyone who asks me about racing, I wish I could explain in English how it feels to drive the car. I
Mm.
can't because it's such a different sensation and feeling to any road car that I've ever driven. It just
Mm.
everything feels different. If I could, I would take everybody and anybody out on the racetrack with a passenger seat and let them experience what we all talk about. Because I think that's the biggest thing between things like rugby, soccer, anyone can pick up the ball and start playing and understand,
Yes.
then you watch it. But I think for motorsport, because you can't just pick up a car and start racing it, you don't really understand it, and then watching racing is boring. So I really
Yes.
try and explain it to people. And when we do track days, make them invested and be able to understand the whole idea of racing and the sensation, why it's so addictive. Obviously, it's not for
Yeah.
everyone, but yeah, as soon as I'm able to come up with the language to explain it to you, I will. But otherwise, just come to England and I'll take you for some passenger laps around Silverstone.
Listen, I can imagine, like, I get what you're saying totally, and everyone I've spoken to about racing, I obviously say the same thing. There is just a big barrier to get into a race car. Like you say, it's not like picking up a soccer ball or rugby ball. It requires you knowing someone or having the money to be able to afford a race car like that. You know, there's different ways to get into one, but the point is, it is quite difficult. But I guess on that question, it would be an obvious answer. But um, what's the what's the sensation or the feeling like when you get into a, let's say, normal Porsche road car versus the race car? Does the road car feel like, oh my word, this thing has like no power? It can't handle like the race car at all. Is it sort of just a letdown and a disappointment, or uh, yeah, or is it actually not? Do you enjoy it in a different light and in a different sense? Um, yeah, what's that sort of that gap or that disparity like?
I think I will hurt so many people's feelings by saying this, but I've been super lucky to have driven lots of cars that people will never be able to even experience those speeds. So for me, speed is like drinking water. It's kind of, it is who I am. It's part of my life in all seriousness. So speed and power, it's normalized for me to such an extreme that I do lots of driver coaching. So people bring their cars to the track and they want to go around the circuit and they want to see what the car is capable of, and I'll drive it. I've been doing a bit of that in England as well to keep busy. I was actually in a turbo the other day, driving around Anglesey, but it is disappointing.
But a
It just,
turbo, you could also, a turbo doesn't really have the sound to go with it. So I mean, that's
no,
also
exactly.
specific. But yes,
But I say disappointing not in the fact that I'm bored of the car,
yes,
but more so the speed. I haven't gotten into a road car and I've gone, oh my word, this is insane. This is so quick. I cannot believe it, and almost scared because obviously on the road cars, they're not set up like a race car.
yes,
So
no,
the
obviously,
tires are different. They have road tires, not slick. So that's huge in terms of you can't carry the corners, same corner speed. You can't brake as late. They don't generate as much heat.
mm,
You don't have all the aero. So there are lots of factors, obviously much heavier. So there are lots of factors that go into what makes a racing car quicker than a road car.
obviously, oh.
But saying that, and I know I'm biased, but the car, every road car that I've driven, I think the McLaren's 720S, when I was helping a person around Killarney, that was an impressive car. That was, I was sitting passenger and helping him with lines, but I mean, that was mind blowing in the sense of how a road car can be doing what it it
Yes,
is. That kind of messed me around a bit. But generally speaking, the manufacturing of the Porsches is just on another level to most, and I'm going to offend so many people, and I'm so sorry, but
you're
most,
biased.
I know I am biased, but it really is. You can tell maybe it's subtle things that I am able to pick up on because of the racing background, but it just feels more of a driving
Mm,
car and set up for the purpose to have fun around the track. Um, but saying that, like I was driving a few years ago a 4C, an Alpha 4C.
Yes.
And even though it doesn't have a lot of power, but it doesn't have power steering, and if it's not one of the quickest cars that I've driven road car wise, but that was one of the most fun cars that I've ever driven. And so I don't really care about speed. It's more about how the car makes you feel and how it handles and how
Yes.
it relays what the tires are doing to you as the driver. And I think so. I'm not biased with speed or the quickest car. And normally, all the cars that have paddle shift, I'm I don't really enjoy driving as much
Mm.
because it feels like you're less connected to the car. I much prefer driving an older Porsche or anything that's manual and then being able to heel and tow. You just feel so much more connected. I don't care if I'm slower compared to the other
Yes.
car. I'm having way more fun. So that that's kind of why I also like the Formula Ford because it's that H pattern gearbox, but they straight cut. And if you get it
Yes.
perfectly, you actually never have to use the clutch. Even though it's manual first, second, third, and fourth, you flat shift going up. So you basically foot flat, and maybe if the dog rings are a bit old, you will lift a tiny bit, like 10% to get into gear. And then going down, you basically just rest your hand on the gear and it goes into neutral. You blip it, and at the right RPM, it will slip into gear. That's without using the clutch or anything. And that mechanical sympathy is just what I love. So I think anything manual, I'm just a
Yes.
nut for. So but it has been, I'm very blessed with the amount of cars that I've been able to drive on the road, on the circuit, road cars on the circuit, um, and be able to see all the differences between them. But I mean,
Mm.
each of them, they have their quirks. And I mean, I have a Nissan 370Z I have had to sell it. But even though it's not quick and you either have to love that car or hate it, I love it. I absolutely love it. I promise you, it was as close as a relative to me. I just
Yes.
loved it. It was manual, it wasn't quick, and it was 2009. I mean, as a racing driver, you would think, oh, no, you would have like a very fast car. It's not that quick. It really isn't. And it wasn't that reliable either. But I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Oh, my word. So I think it's more how the car makes you feel
Yeah.
is more important than basically anything.
I
So
I think what makes a road car special is just different to what makes a track car special. I mean,
agreed,
you can.
agreed.
Some people think the Mazda MX-5 is the best car on earth. You know, in comparison to a GT3 RS or 720S, they would prefer that just because of the manual analog driver's experience, similar to what you've mentioned now.
Exactly.
So I get it. But what you're actually telling me is that you'd be fine with a normal Polo as a road car, and then just hitting the track with Porsches on the weekend. Because it sounds to me like you can have a normal daily,
If
and
it
you'll be
makes
fine.
me happy, where there are quite a few road cars that I just am not a fan of, where there's just not much happening and you feel so disconnected to the car.
Mm.
But I actually started out with a Volvo S40, an old one, but manual. I loved it. I could have dailied that. I could have dailied it now. I just absolutely loved it because it just gave me a feeling like I could heel and tow. I mean, normally some cars, because of the brake booster on the brake, you can't really get to the throttle. I had so much fun. My dad will probably hear this and go, Andrew, but I was racing that S40 everywhere I went, even though it had no power. I was in love with that car. I'd drive to school and then I'd race back. even though it didn't handle great and it was a safe car. So
Yeah.
luckily, Volvo. But I mean, I could happily, I don't have an itch anymore to get into a road car. I actually have a van in England that
Yes.
I drive.
That's very British of you, having a van.
Thank you. Thank you. So I don't feel like I have that itch where I'm in need of driving a fast car on the road as much because my itch just gets taken away on the weekend. And
Yes.
if it's a very busy week, the last thing you really feel like doing is getting into an uncomfortable sports car. Um, and
I can
shaking
imagine.
on the clutch and just I prefer getting in my van, turning the heated seats on, listening to music or a podcast, and then cruise control, and it doesn't take any fuel, and I'm perfect. Then I come home and I just sleep, and that's good
Wow.
enough.
Would you
Yeah,
have it? A van is a satisfactory daily driver for a race car driver. That definitely shaped a bit of my mentality. But listen, Andrew, I wanna thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
absolute pleasure.
It was an awesome chat to have. I definitely learned a lot when it comes to motorsport and racing. Obviously, for a car guy like me, really, I haven't really experienced race cars as you have. But obviously, it's definitely each I'd like to scratch at some point.
Come to
But
England. I'll
listen,
take you.
I might be there sooner than you think, so I'll give you a
Good.
ring. But thanks a lot. We're backing you for this like racing series coming up. I think it's very exciting to see, um, like just the trajectory that your career has been on so far, and then where it is going. Like maybe it's a Porsche factory driver, or maybe you're getting paid by some super wealthy guy. We'll see. But it sounds pretty prosperous to me. So we back you. But yeah, man, thanks for your time. And usually,
Thank
like I
you so much.
say, rather love cars because it's better than drugs. Well, in your case, it's a bit of an addiction, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I
But
was about to say, I don't know, I think mine's a bit on the spectrum.
yeah, but awesome, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Cheers,
Sweet.
everyone.